Well, welcome everybody to Cyber Market Update specifically for law firms. This is a joint presentation by IMA, which is us as an insurance broker, Coalition, which is one of our top carrier partners and most proactive cyber carrier in the space, and STS, which is strategic technology solution company specifically targeting and working with law firms. So today, our presentation is going to cover both insurance, what's going on the cyber market, and actions and strategies you can take to position your firm best moving forward to handle this lovely topic. So I'm going to share my screen here. We'll get going. So our presenters today are myself. I've run insurance brokerage that specializes in professional liability for law firms and real estate companies. We've merged in with IMA about a year and a half ago, and are a national company specifically focused on risk management for mid-size and larger companies across the country. Katie has been a long-time partner with us. We are both located in Portland, Oregon, and work nationally together. Katie has had many years of insurance experience, and I don't remember exactly how long you've been at Coalition, but it's been a long time, and we've done lots of work collectively together in the legal and real estate spaces. And then Michael, as we are both sponsors of the Arizona ALA and Southern California, and Michael will be addressing best practices for us all at the end. So we're excited to be able to do this joint presentation together. And here's what we'll be talking about today. So really the agenda, we're going to start with a little bit of like the context for some of the problem with cyber and law firms, and talking about insurance that fits. And then really most of the presentation today will be really focused on how are the bad guys stealing. So in purchasing insurance and protecting your firm, one of the most important things is like, where are the losses coming from, and how are the threat actors targeting law firms, and then how do you best position your firm against that, and then practical security practices, and then we'll end with Q&A. So some of the landscape for the legal industry and cyber. So if we look at this industry group as a whole nationally, from a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the best, 10 being the worst, the industry is really kind of at the worst end of the spectrum because of just the target by the threat actors, the ability for the threat actors to get money and data. And from a carrier standpoint, there's just less flexibility. So as we move forward in addressing cyber best practices and insurance, understanding that the legal industry really isn't the most popular girl at the dance. And there's a focal point on trying to provide insurance to the legal industry in a way that's profitable. And why is this? So when I say legal is not performing well, that means that there's from a premiums paid to claims frequency and severity, legal has a higher than average claim dollar amount and frequency. And we continue to experience higher severity claims than other industries. And the legal industry is really one of the top targets to threat actors. And many firms still have no MFA or multi-factor authentication, which is interesting. So when we look at some of the key findings for 2025 and 2024, Katie's going to be mad at me because I like to talk about the decrease in claims frequency. Well, it's small, so these are some of the global highlights. So there's been a decrease year over year in claims frequency. The average loss globally, so for all industry classes, is still in excess of $100,000. And two areas are the dominant drivers of loss, which is business email compromise and fund transfer fraud. We'll talk a lot about those later. For business email compromise, even though there's a decrease in claims severity, or frequency, there's an increase in severity due to claims coming through a compromise of your email inbox. Average loss is about 35,000, and almost a third of email compromises end in an escalation of a claim to a fund transfer fraud claim, and that average runs about $106,000. Fund transfer fraud, so there's a decrease in how those claims, the dollar amount of those claims. The average loss is just under about $200,000. Some of the reason for the decrease in the severity of that, and we'll talk about that too, is that financial institutions are flagging larger transfers, the sophistication of cyber carriers like Coalition, who has a very active role in protecting and clawing back funds from threat actors. Those two things have really helped impact the decrease in severity. And ransomware, we've seen a decrease in the amount of money that these claims, not only in ransom, but also the expenses, has moved under 300,000. And the initial demands are also decreasing just because of a lot of the increased security posture of a lot of companies. So when we look at and we talk about frequency and severity, the frequency is the number of claims, severity is the amount that's paid out. And this data, the way that we source this data is through Coalition on a national basis. And so with the amount of the insureds that they have, we're able to track this data by essentially semesters. So like in this table, the red portion is the first 6 months of the year. The lavender portion is the last 6 months of the year. So severity by industries, across all industries, firms that would be considered mid-sized firms, has decreased slightly. And for much larger firms, the decrease has been almost 20%. This is a very important slide to take a look at for the areas where claims are coming from. So I talked about this initially in the beginning. So the red portion is business email compromise, blue portion is fund transfer fraud, yellow is ransomware, and then the remainder is a whole different smattering of different ways the bad guys are stealing. But what this says is like the three major factors make up 80% of the claims. So email compromise, fund transfer fraud, and ransomware. In ransomware losses, you can see that the initial demand, so between the first half of the year, second half of the year, we've moved under $1 million, which we haven't seen for a long time. And then in the actual money or loss paid out, we've moved to under $300,000. So the severity of ransomware, both from the initial demand and the actual cost, is declining. However, it's still very significant. And we talk a lot about phishing, and this is really important to just understand. And in working with firms all across the industry, there's confusion about phishing, and it's really not associated with one event. It's simply how hackers get into the system. Once inside, they can pursue all sorts of activity, which is why phishing is the leading attack vector for all cyber claims. So when we're talking about prevention, which Michael will hit, and training, these are important factors to consider. So we look at transfer, unauthorized transfer of money and securities, and we are still pretty severe for fund transfer fraud. This moved down significantly from last year. And it's what we're seeing is that due to both the carrier and increased security postures, as well as greater activity from your financial institutions, we're still seeing severity here, but it's declining. We've had, so as a broker, I've had the privilege of being involved in some very large business interruption claims. And I wanted to just highlight this because once you experience a business interruption due to a cyber event, loss of your network, ransomware, the the costs of a business interruption claim, both for your loss or if you experienced a business interruption due to compromise or a cyber event from a software vendor or a technology partner, the cost can be severe. So this is just a summary of some of those costs. So we've seen a 450% increase in these costs from 2019. If we look at the average total nationally, the including business interruption, the cost can be very close to $1 million. And because some of the very severe business interruptions in the cyber events, calculations say that that's about $5,600 a minute. So some of these can be very severe. So looking at this and looking at how the bad guys steal, I just wanted, before I hand it off to Katie, I wanted to just interject a few things about positioning yourself to purchase insurance well and to have a good posture regarding the protection of your firm when it comes to insurance. Many of the application processes are very tedious, and working to get a full implementation of security measures, both in how and the ability to articulate that, as well as perform under a scan. Most of the carriers are scanning your system as part of the application process. So implementing the suggestions and partnering well with your carrier is very important. If you've had claims activity, communicate your story and what you've done outside of the application. So if you've had claims, if you've had losses, and you've made improvements, tell your story. And then looking at what's on the other side of the policy. Does your broker have a relationship, or are they just using a third-party wholesaler to get you a policy? Who handles claims? What assistance do you get if the claim goes bad? And what will the carrier do to help you? Do you have access provided by your broker? for outside claims counsel assistance. So these are all things and questions I would ask if I'm buying insurance. It's like, I want to know what's on the other side of the policy. And if you have things that need to be worked on, work on those things outside of the renewal season. There's a couple of things from just purely in coverage that we want to look at. And reviewing all your limits. And where I see deficiencies is really, this is why we're having this webinar, is there oftentimes are very significant deficiencies for crime coverage. So theft of money and securities. What is covered for your loss? What is covered for a third-party loss? Look at all the cybercrime sublimits, and your ransomware should be at the full limits of the policy. Make sure there is no coinsurance, which means that the carrier does not just have a deductible, but you have to participate in the loss. This is something that is still around. I just had a policy we reviewed 2 months ago that still had coinsurance in it, where the client had to participate 50% in the loss. This should not be there. Business interruption, make sure that you have your first party business interruption, but also if you have a supplier or vendor who has a business interruption loss, you should have coverage there. And then short periods of business or of restoration. This just means if you do have a business interruption loss, that you should be able to have longer, as long as possible, to restore your network and still get paid under the policy. The last thing I want to look at is limits. So initially, when this first started happening, where we were working with law firms to buy insurance, everybody bought $1 million policy. Now we're seeing like 56% of professional service firms buy more than $1 million. This slide is a lot of color, but you can see by the blue how many size or the size of firms that buy over $1 million. So the left is the revenue on the firm. So a firm that's buying, that's generating 10 to 50 million in revenue, 34% of those firms are buying over $1 million, 56 or 46% are buying 2 to 5. So what's the trend? This top line is the trend for premium. What this says is that the market is flat and soft, and the ability to make changes to your insurance now is also beneficial, because you can do many things where you can increase the protection for your firm without increasing costs. So Katie, you want to talk about how the bad guys are stealing?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Blake. As previously introduced, I'm Katie Fairhart. I lead business development for Coalition in the Northwest. I have 16 years of commercial property casualty experience and have spent the last 5 years with Coalition solely focused on cyber liability and cybersecurity. I want to provide a brief introduction to who Coalition is and how we do things, because we do it a little differently. So Coalition is actually defined as an insurtech because we combine security technology, security services, and comprehensive insurance coverage. We were founded just over 8 years ago, and today support more than 100,000 policyholders, working with many of the world's leading insurance carriers, with over 700 employees across 9 different countries. Next slide, please, Blake. And I mentioned that our approach to cyber insurance is a little unique, and we call this unique approach active insurance. And that is built kind of on these four main ideas, and that is that we utilize proprietary security technology to properly assess risk, or more easily stated, our technology allows us to look at potential policyholders in the eyes of the bad guys. So we understand before a policyholder becomes a coalition policyholder what their network looks like externally and what vulnerabilities and things that they may have. We then provide that ongoing protection with our security technology to make sure that our policyholders don't have any issues. Or if we become aware of zero-day vulnerabilities, we're able to alert our policyholders who utilize that technology and have a security team on staff that helps our policyholders work through remediation efforts, really helping our policyholders avoid cyber incidents and be proactive against cyber criminals. The third piece is that we have in-house incident response and claims teams. Blake just kind of touched on this as an important key factor in choosing a cyber insurance provider and partner. Because of our in-house capabilities, our average response time to reported incidents is 5 minutes, which is extremely critical with cyber incidents. And then finally, we provide comprehensive coverage when the worst does occur to get our policyholders back to business. And our active insurance approach is proven at scale. Our policyholders experience 73% fewer claims than the marketplace, with 56% of incidents handled at no cost to our policyholders. And despite these two phenomenal statistics, if you're wondering if cyber insurance pays claims, Coalition has still paid over $450 million in cyber claims in the last 8 years. We all get to spend some time together this morning because cyber risk remains an unavoidable reality of doing business in a digital world. And because of this, it continues to be the most significant concern for business leaders globally. And understandably so, as threat actors demonstrate the relentless evolving tactics to exploit new vulnerabilities and maximize financial gain. Cyber crimes are estimated to grow to 10.5 trillion in 2025. And what we know today is that the size of a business, small or large, or industry class, education or legal, does not make any organization exempt from these risks. We saw threat actors specifically targeting healthcare facilities during the height of the pandemic, knowing that they were short-staffed and overwhelmed with sick patients, and have supported our own coalition policyholders who are nonprofits in trying to recover 7-figure fraudulent wire transfers. What makes the cyber threat landscape extra challenging is that it's dynamic. Cyber criminals are constantly evolving and changing their tactics. And we've seen cyber criminals improving their approach in the following ways. They're utilizing AI to scale attacks and improve efficiency. We probably see this most often in their ability to make those phishing attacks that Blake mentioned, which are email attempts to gain sensitive information. They're using AI to utilize better grammar in those emails to make them less easy to detect. In addition, ransomware gangs are operating like businesses. Long gone is the picture of a cyber criminal with a hooded sweatshirt in a dark basement. These are full-scale commercial operations who go to work every day just like you and I, but their sole purpose is try to exploit businesses like our employers. And then finally, we see increased dwell time. Cyber criminals are spending more time studying patterns and communications after gaining access to networks, allowing them to better execute attacks that go unnoticed for longer periods of time. And we see cyber criminals using all of these tactics just mentioned in the most common type of cyber claim we see. Blake already touched on it at the beginning of this presentation. We refer to it as funds transfer fraud or social engineering. And in these attacks, this is when criminals manipulate businesses into unknowingly sending money to fraudulent accounts. I.e., an employee within your organization is tricked into sending money to a cyber criminal who they believe to be a legitimate vendor, client, subcontractor. These attacks require little to no sophistication on the cyber criminal's end and can also be extremely lucrative to the cyber criminal. Obviously, law firms are particularly attractive to cyber criminals in this regard due to the frequency and size of wire transfers occurring from many types of law practices. A similar, yet slightly different type of cybercrime loss we see is called invoice manipulation. This is when cyber criminals trick your clients or vendors into paying a fraudulent invoice, and you're then unable to collect funds owed to your organization. So in this case, your organization's loss is uncollectible funds owed to you versus the direct loss of money, like we just discussed in the social engineering case. And then finally, a unique exposure really to law firms in the legal industry is funds transfer liability. So this is actually a liability coverage. And it's when your organization is purported to have transmitted payment instructions to a business partner or client that results in that third party losing funds. So thus the liability exposure here. Your organization has not lost funds. Your potential client has lost funds. An easy example here is a real estate transaction, right? The legal firm is purported to have transmitted the closing instructions and the potential home buyer follows those instructions. The key here is that there must be a security failure on the insured's organization's part. So while social engineering events continue to be the most frequent claims we see in cyber insurance, ransomware claims remain the most severe or high cost losses. And Blake touched on this briefly. We use the term ransomware a lot, but I always like to take a minute to make sure that we understand what a ransomware claim or attack really is. We hear almost nightly now on the news, right? XYZ grocery store, airline, retail establishment is experiencing a cyber attack. But what this actually means, or for it to be considered ransomware, three things must be true. One, files are either partially or totally encrypted, aka an organization likely cannot use their network. Two, there's a way to contact the attacker. This white text box on the slide here is an example of a ransomware note that one of our policyholders received when trying to log into their system one morning, letting them know their files were encrypted, how to get in touch with the ransomware group. And then the third piece is there is a way to decrypt the data. This is usually, unfortunately, if you do not have viable backups, by way of paying a ransom demand to the cyber criminal to get your data back. A common question I get when discussing ransomware claims is, do the bad guys actually return the data after a ransom demand is paid? And the answer is almost yes. And that is because cyber criminals are in the business of making money, and their business model does not work if they don't return the data, right? If they stop returning people's data, no one's going to pay them ransom demands, and they don't get what they want out of the arrangement. In ransomware attacks, just one more comment on that. And Blake did a wonderful job of touching on this in discussing business income. These events can become very, very costly due to a couple things. One, the loss of income, right? We see some organizations that are able to be down for just a few hours or just a few days. We see some organizations who are down and cannot operate for weeks, and have seen organizations not able to fully recover for months or years after a ransom attack. So the amount of time that an organization is down can vary and can be very significant. An organization, as I mentioned, may have to pay a ransom to the cyber criminals to recover critical data. If you have a robust cyber insurance program, the cyber insurance actually will pay that demand on behalf of your organization. And then you may have to legally or proactively notify customers of the breach to avoid reputational harm. So it's understanding how these claims get so large so quickly. And then we have this final sort of new piece of cyber claims that we're seeing. And we're calling these third-party disruptions. And really what they are risk aggregation events, where a single cyber event causes widespread loss to other organizations. And we saw this with Change Healthcare. They're a tech company that processes payments for the healthcare industry. They experienced a ransomware event that left them unable to operate for weeks. It impacted healthcare clinics and pharmacies throughout the country, and the total estimated loss is more than $1.6 billion. We saw the same thing with a firm called CDK Global. They're a software vendor for the auto industry. It impacted 15,000 auto dealers with estimated losses exceeding $1 billion. And these loss examples kind of go back to where my conversation began, that cyber risk remains an unavoidable reality of doing business in a digital world. But it's an important reminder that it's critical to understand the cybersecurity posture and protocols of your key vendors and partners, particularly those who access your network. And it's also important that your cyber insurance program would address such a loss in the event your firm incurred a financial loss due to a key vendor or partner experiencing a cyber incident. And that coverage would come through a coverage we call contingent business interruption coverage. A quick touch just on cyber insurance as a whole. Blake did a great job of kind of discussing some key coverages and the importance of buying a robust cyber insurance program. I always just like to touch on this as a very broad understanding. A robust cyber insurance policy at a very basic level should include two parts. One, third-party coverage for any liability your organization experiences because of a cyber incident. And two, first-party coverages, expenses your organization incurs because of a cyber incident. What's sort of interesting is that the founding of cyber insurance, the concern was third-party coverage, right? We have all this data. What happens when our system gets breached? We expose that private information and all of our clients come back and sue us. What's interesting today is that first-party coverages, all the things we've discussed so far this morning, funds transfer fraud, social engineering losses, ransomware losses, business income losses, lead the cyber insurance marketplace today to the tune of about 90% of claims that Coalition pays are first-party coverage losses. And now a brief update on the cyber insurance marketplace today. Blake touched on a couple of these items, so I'll move quickly, but just want to dive in a little bit deeper on a couple items. I teased Blake about his positivity about the direction of cyber claims and decreasing 7%. I only say that because we know that cyber criminals are dynamic, and anytime we see a dip, we tend to see a peak right after that. We're also coming off of historic claim highs. We saw cyber claims take off almost in tandem with the COVID pandemic, when organizations had to facilitate remote work almost overnight. And the cyber criminals took advantage of those insecure remote access setups. So any positivity we see in things kind of coming down today are coming off of historic claim highs. I would also like to mention that the great majority of Coalition's more than 100,000 policyholders are organizations with less than $100 million in revenue. So it makes these to be discussed loss amounts, in my opinion, even more impactful. We're not talking about an MGM casino type loss. We are talking about true, what we consider middle market businesses experiencing these six-figure cyber losses. And with that, our average loss amount for all policyholders throughout 2024 was $115,000. Blake touched on this briefly. Our average funds transfer fraud or social engineering loss was $185,000. This is down significantly from historic highs in 2023 of like a $350,000 average. The reason I'm not super excited about it is I still see our claims team regularly supporting our policyholders, trying to recover seven-figure fraudulent transfers. So while the average is decreasing, we do still see policyholders experiencing very large, significant events. Ransomware losses, as we mentioned, are the leader from a cost perspective, or what we call severity perspective, with our average ransomware loss being $292,000. And then Blake touched on this as well, but this is a continuing persistent trend for the last 3 years. Email-based attacks continue to lead the way, with 60% of claims reported to Coalition originating from the email inbox. Most often common being that it is a phishing attempt, meaning an email sent to your organization trying to get secure information. A quick kind of side note, so we talk about phishing a lot, it's becoming a more common term. There's a few more terms coming out now. We're now concerned about vishing with a V, that is voicemail or calls trying to get private information. This is actually how the MGM casino attack occurred. The cyber criminals actually called the IT help desk and impersonated being an employee of the firm to get login credentials. And then smishing, which are SMS text messages trying to get private information. I don't know if any of you are guilty of the same crime as me, but I get regular texts about my unpaid tolls and how I will be headed to federal prison soon. Perfect example of these smishing attempts we're now seeing from cyber criminals. So a couple important takeaways from these overall claim trends, and Blake touched on this briefly. Really rapid response to business email compromise or any suspected cyber incidents. When a bad guy gets access to a business email compromise, if that is all they're able to achieve, our average loss amount was only $35,000. When they are able to take that email access and then convert it into the ability to fraudulently transfer funds, the loss amount increases to $106,000. So this is a reminder to all of you that you can hopefully share with your organization is employee education, firm education, making sure people understand if they see something, say something right away, because rapid response to these events are critical to mitigate losses. A second piece, and Blake stole my thunder on this one a little bit, but the decreasing of social engineering and funds transfer fraud losses going down to an average of $185,000, as Blake mentioned. This is a perfect example of the kind of constant cat and mouse game that we play with cyber criminals. So we had seen these averages really taking off. We were regularly seeing very large fraudulent transfers being attempted. And then thankfully, financial institutions stepped up and realized they could play a part in mitigating these losses by automatically flagging large transfers for review. So thank you to financial institutions for taking this step. Unfortunately, cyber criminals quickly become aware that this is happening. So what do? They start reducing the amount of their transfers, no longer regularly going for those really large transfers, instead trying to execute smaller transfers and maybe multiple of them that will go unnoticed and not flagged. And then finally, just a touch on ransomware. So we talked about the average loss for coalition firms being $292,000. What's really interesting, in that same time period, the actual average ransom demand that our policyholders received was $1.1 million. So why the difference there, right? The demand's 1.1 million, average loss ends up being just under 300,000. And the reason is that only 44% of our policyholders who experienced a ransomware attack actually had to pay ransom demands. So this is signs of positive trends, right? This likely means that those organizations had some form of viable backups to be able to not respond to bad guys and just say, nope, we're going to focus our efforts on restoring from our backups and get our business back up and running. Of the percentage of policyholders who did have to pay ransom demands, our incident response and claims team also play a role in negotiating with the cyber criminals, and we're able to negotiate those ransom demands that we did have to pay down by 60%. So some good news on that front as well. But something to be aware of, that the demands are still very, very large, even though the total claims amounts are just an average of 300,000. And that is it from me. I'll hand it over to Mike now to discuss best practices for your firm to help mitigate and avoid, hopefully, any of the incidents that we just discussed.
Thanks, Katie. Could you go back to that one there, please? Thank you. Thanks to Katie and Blake for letting me join in the fun, and thanks to the Arizona, LA, as well as the Vegas ALA chapters for helping us promote this. So appreciate the time today. My name is Michael Ubaldini. I head up business development over here at Strategic Technology Solutions. Just briefly, what we do is try to partner with law firms to align their cybersecurity and their technology roadmap to the overall vision and goals of the firm. I've been working with firms for over 20 years in this manner, so really appreciate the time today. And I love the fact that Katie brought up the smishing topic. And yes, I do get those texts about tolls. One of the favorite ones I get is that I'm late for a date. I've been married for 23 years, and it's definitely not my wife texting me saying I'm late for a date. So just be careful of some of those tactics out there. Blake and Katie touched on, and I'll park on this slide just for a minute, really around the phishing. Katie mentioned that the threat actors out there continue to get more sophisticated. They're becoming more and more patient. They're financially backed. They're running as businesses, and they're leveraging tools out there to become smarter, artificial intelligence being one of them. Phishing is the number one component. 90% of attacks happen via phishing or start with phishing, and ransomware, malware, some of those on there are what phishing leads to. The one I do want to bring up, because we're seeing more and more of it, is the supply chain attacks. And that's, as a law firm, who are you partnering with? Blake touched on the IT companies that you're working with or might be working with, the applications or software companies you might be working with. It could be your real estate company, or it could be your office folks that you're working, the office supply folks that you're working with. Could be your landlord. You're all in partnerships with these other organizations. What is their cybersecurity maturity level? What access do they have to your sensitive information, your client's sensitive information? Some of these things should be evaluated as part of your security maturity assessment. So just a couple things to touch on before we move forward. I do have a public Wi-Fi story for you. That's for another time and place on a plane trip that I was on, but we could touch that in the questions and answers if you'd like to. So if you could switch the slides, that'd be great. So how do we combat this? One thing that I touch on often is that because the threat actors seem to be a step ahead of us, and I don't know if we'll ever catch up, and I don't believe we'll ever surpass them. Maybe we will at some point in time, but how could we at least try to keep pace with them? And there's a number of different ways in which we can do that. And there's a number of different ways we could protect ourselves. We tend to look at this as a layered approach. You can look at the graphic on the right here, the litany of doors, right? If we could envision all these doors being closed, you hit that first door that's locked, a threat actor gets through that first door, they're going to be greeted with a series of other doors. So there's that layered approach of controls that we could put in place, or strategies we could put in place to help protect ourselves. It really starts in understanding what we don't know. I was talking to a firm yesterday, and this comes up often whether it's around technology, but around cybersecurity too. They don't know what they don't know. So how could we help firms? How can we help the community understand what it is that they don't know? Eliminate a lot of the assumption. I asked the question, how do you feel about your current security maturity level? I think it's okay. That's not an answer that really fulfills me with a lot of confidence. We as leaders tend to put the keys to the kingdom in the hands of our security professionals, of our IT professionals, and we hope and assume that they're going to take care of things. How do we eliminate that assumption and understand what our true cybersecurity maturity level is? Well, it starts with some level of assessment, some level of audit. These assessments, these audits really consist of going into your environment, going into the firm's environment, and deeply auditing where the risk is, where the vulnerability is, where your openings are, and outlining remediations to help reduce that risk, providing the firm y'all with tangible evidence to know, okay, this is what we understand our risk to be today. These are the controls or the remediations we need to implement. And this is what our risk is going to be after that. In some instances, what's recommended may not be appropriate or relevant to your firm, depending on the type of firm you are, your culture, your practice. There's your risk tolerance. So all these things are evaluated based on a couple frameworks, the National Institute of Standards and Technology and the Center for Internet Security. There's probably about 147, 150 controls that are evaluated in a true security assessment. And these security assessments should be done by organizations and IT partners that are cyber secure, cyber certified themselves. And that's going through a process of themselves being audited and assessed and validated of the controls that they have in place. So it all starts really with a security assessment. Should be done on an annual basis. Some firms we work with do it multiple times a year just to see where they are if a potential project or a potential change in the firm happens. Part of the assessments too are the vulnerability scans as well as penetration testing. So if you could go to the next slide, we'll go through what the layers are. So again, it starts with that assessment. It starts of understanding where your risk is. So how do we combat the risk? We touched on it. I think we labored on it to a degree, but it's critically important is we are the biggest threats to ourselves, not STS, not the IT company, but us as consumers, us as the end users. Human error is the top risk. Something gets into the system, an email breaks through some way, shape, or form. We touched on the business email compromise. We click on something we shouldn't. We go somewhere we shouldn't. We download something we shouldn't. Security awareness training. In many cases, whether it's your cyber security insurance, whether you're getting an audit or an assessment from one of your clients, depending on what type of practice you have, it's a button you click off. It's a checkbox. Yeah, we do cybersecurity awareness training. It could be once a year. Recommend it's monthly. Again, the threat actors are becoming more and more sophisticated. We need to be keeping up with that. Constant training, constant education is the way in which to do that, because there's new tactics that are coming up each and every day almost that we need to stay abreast on. So security awareness training programs and your policies. How many firms out there, I think, Blake, you touched on it, that there's a small number of organizations, and this isn't just legal. This is many, many organizations. Legal just happens to be where we spend a lot of our time and is a very, very high target these days. But there's a lot of firms that don't have two things in place: an incident response plan, as well as a business continuity or backup and disaster recovery plan. That's another layer. Something that would be evaluated in an assessment, but something you should certainly be evaluating now. If you don't have an incident response plan and a business continuity backup disaster recovery plan in place, certainly something you should reach out to your IT team about. Web content filtering is another layer. If something does get in, if we do click on something, if we go somewhere we shouldn't, we could isolate that. We could stop that from happening, blocking certain websites. And I know this sometimes is difficult within a law firm, especially when you're dealing with courts and you're dealing with third-party organizations. It could be frustrating to the end users. It could be frustrating specifically to partners. But these are a lot of things that come out in that assessment. What needs to be blocked? What needs to be contained? What do we have to prevent our users from going out to and downloading? Dark web monitoring, again, another layer where we could scan. There's tools, there's organizations that could scan the dark web to see what type of sensitive data may be out there that's relative to your firm, relative to yourself, relative to your clients. Office 365 hardening. I'm not sure how many folks have heard of this before. It's something that is typically looked at often when we move firms over to Office 365. Yes, there are firms that still have Exchange on-prem. Once, twice a year, we see this. But essentially what that means is evaluating how your firm does business. So, for example, if you're a law firm in Phoenix, Arizona, and you do not conduct any type of business outside the United States, you're not in any way, shape, or form partnering with international organizations or international clients, there's no reason you should have any settings set to allow any data, any information to come into your firm from those foreign countries. Just a small example of how to harden an Office 365 environment. It's also something that can be done on the server environment as well as the workstation environment. Next slide, please. Touched a little bit on vulnerability management systems. So vulnerability scanning is something that can be done as part of the assessment, but this is something we recommend doing each month. Again, a lot of changes happen with technology, a lot of shifts and changes happen within law firms. So going through a monthly scan just to assess where your vulnerabilities may be, what may have changed from August into September, what might be coming down the road. For example, do you have an application, or do you have a piece of hardware, a firewall that might be coming end of life? Vulnerability scans are able to detect that. These are vulnerabilities that can be attack vectors for cyber criminals. So what plan do we have in place based upon our policies and our strategies to remediate those vulnerabilities that are coming down the pipe? Security information and event management, also known as SIEM. This is essentially, Big Brother. This is eyes on glass, watching very much everything that could be happening and is happening within your technology environment within the firm as it relates to cyber threats. This is also the tool, as well as it's a security operations center. It's a manned security operations center, 24/7 by 365. A lot of organizations have this as an offering. Some firms that we work with have this internally. It's quite an investment, but it's critical from a cybersecurity prevention standpoint. It has the ability, like I said, to be looking at everything, what's happening, any trends, any suspicious activity. And if somebody finally gets through that last door, so to speak, it immediately notifies the stakeholders based upon your incident response plan and isolates that breach immediately. So it separates the breach, and then the remediation happens. Some instances, the remediation is able to take care of the breach in real time. In other instances, it's a bigger or more severe breach, and we have to start notifying not only the stakeholders internally and externally, but do we need to notify clients? Do we need to notify law enforcement? Do we need to bring in a forensics team? Do we need to start talking to our clients? So those are the layers that I mentioned. Benchmark hardening is the last one there. That's, again, something that is very, very similar to the Office 365 hardening, but something that should be really looked at as you're wanting to mature your cybersecurity environment. This is also going to help, and I think Blake and Katie could attest to this with potentially it's going to reduce your risk by implementing these controls and strategies, but it could help in getting you a better policy, a better premium, and an overall better security posture. Next slide, please. This is just summing everything up. I had mentioned if you don't have an incident response plan or disaster recovery plan in place, it's something that really should be a high priority. And just get an understanding of where your risk might be. Eliminate that assumption. There's too many firms that we talk to that feel and assume that their security maturity level is high. They have multi-factor authentication in place. They have some firewalls. They have a cyber insurance policy in place, and all those are great, but that's the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure we've all heard it. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Let's put these strategies in place to prevent the when from happening. So I think that's all I have. I believe we are going to open it up for Q&A, if I'm not mistaken. Blake or Katie, if you're talking, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mike. One question from Stacy. Are these numbers that are being shared across all industries or coalitions, book, or specific to law firms? There was a combination of both. There was some law firm specific data in there, but the bulk of the losses are across all industries based on size, which are similar to, and in some cases, law firms perform worse than those benchmarks. But it's the data in this presentation was a combination of really all three of your questions across all industries, coalitions, book nationally, and then law firm specific stuff. So not a great answer, but we covered really kind of all of that data. Michael, we got a question. Do you have recommendations on how to train staff on recognizing phishing?
Yeah, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right, Lien. Yeah, well, there's a couple components to that. There's tools out there internally as well as with our clients. We use Huntress, which is a tool out there. There's KnowBe4. There's a couple other platforms that offer security awareness training, and not only the training on a monthly basis, but they also conduct phishing attacks, simulated phishing attacks. So it gives them the ability to test your firm, test the users. We do that internally here as well. We'd certainly recommend it. So those are two of the highly recommended tools out there. It really comes down, again, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right, Leanne, is the consistency. Just constantly having those simulations, helping them understand how to recognize attack, a phishing attack. Katie mentioned it. They're getting more and more sophisticated and harder to recognize these days. Obviously, there's antivirus protection. There's malware protection that you could put into place. Those are other tools, other layers and controls you could put in from a technology perspective to prevent some of these attacks from coming in. But again, I don't think there's one answer to it. I think there's the antivirus and malware and spamware. There's the consistent training and some of the tactics I had mentioned. Hopefully that answers, but happy to go offline to discuss it in more detail.
The other thing, Katie, you can speak to, like what your like looking at resources that are provided by your carrier partner. Not all carriers are created equal. And Katie, can you just talk a little bit about your resource that you?
Yeah, I was just going to touch briefly on Coalition actually believes so strongly in the security awareness training that Michael mentioned, that we will actually, we have Coalition provides our own offering of security awareness training. And if policyholders purchase that additional training, side note, typically a fairly nominal cost, we will actually provide our policyholders with additional $100,000 social engineering funds transfer fraud limit. So that's how strongly we believe in the effectiveness of that training. All the things Michael just mentioned, just people becoming aware of what those typical emails look like, right? Often very urgent. They're very strategic to come in on this Friday would be a perfect example, a Friday before a long weekend, right? Just being aware of those simple tactics. So when you get something that doesn't look right, knowing that individuals in your firm will be able to identify and flag those versus clicking a link or providing important information.
That's great.
Well, it looks like that's the end of the questions. We just wanted to thank you guys for attending the opportunity to present today. Part of what we do all collectively is help law firms. So if you have questions, everybody will get the slide deck, a copy of the presentation, and Michael is providing a summary of kind of some best practices to go along with that. And, you know, in the end, you don't know whether anything is good or bad except through comparison, and a lot of the devil's in the details with things. So if you'd like opportunity to review anything, we're happy to help. And with that, we'll conclude today. And we just wanted to say thanks again for the opportunity and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thanks.